All right, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Let's wait for other people to come in first before we do anything. There's two people now. Hassan, Nathan, Hussein. Joining. Well, that's taking a long time to. All right, everybody seems to be here. Yes, everybody's here. Welcome to our session 17, The Wisdom of the Throne. We will read these two short sections. For next week, obviously, there's going to be quite a bit of reading because I want to finish this section two completely because then we go on to the final part of the book, the third mashriq, third place of illumination. So next week we'll be sitting here reading for quite a while, over 10 pages, and then next week plan on a long session. Those who haven't been attending should make a note of it that next week's session is going probably go for the full 1 hour 45 minutes. So I hope everybody's doing well. I've had a pretty interesting week. Someone put me onto this book. Actually, it was Felix Vladimir Solovyov, A Short Story of the Antichrist. This sort of thing has been kind of preoccupying me recently, and Felix suggested that I get a copy of it. It just actually arrived about a couple of minutes ago, so it looks quite interesting. According to Felix, this Antichrist figure basically sets up a New Age universalist cult in Palestine. So I think with his tongue in his cheek, Solovyov had actually someone very particular in mind. So I'm looking forward to reading this thing after we finish our session today. It's just a short story, about 59 pages. And then I'll report back to you if you want to hear about it. It looks like quite an interesting short story. Anywho, let's get cracking into Mulla Sadra Shirazi and these next two sections of Section B, which is Section 2 and Section 3. So, principle concerning the true nature of the other world of the soul. Now, right here in the title, Mulla Sadra basically gives us everything that we need to know about what he takes by even the notion of akhirah, of the hereafter. And this is a very controversial position to take because what Mulla Sadra has been kind of slowly leading us to is to delocalize the hereafter. So let us just read now what he has to say. A, that which returns on the day of the return is this individual, sensible, tangible man composed of the contrary elements and humors and the blending of parts and organs generated from material constituents. In at every instant, all the parts, organs, substances, and accidents of that man, even his heart and his brain, are constantly being transformed. This is especially true of his vaporous spirit, which is the natural body closest to his spiritual essence and the highest level of his soul in this material world, the pedestal of his essence, the throne on which he stands, and the encampment of his powers and forces. Yet even this part of the body is continuously being changed and transformed, passing away and coming to be. The decisive point in the body's remaining, this particular body, despite the constant transformation of its material constituents, is only the unity of the soul. As long as the particular individual Zayd soul remains this soul, his body is also this same particular body, since the soul of a thing is the perfection of its reality and ipseity or individual substance. This is also a subtle refutation of some of the premises for reincarnation, right there, by inference, that is. This is why it is said that this child is the one who will grow old, or this old man was a child, even though with age he has lost all the particular material parts and organs that he had as a child. Indeed, one can rightly say that the old man's finger is the same finger that he possessed in childhood, although in itself the childhood finger has disappeared with respect to both its form and its matter. so that nothing remains of it as a particular body. It only remains the figure of this man because of the persistence of his soul. Hence, this present body is precisely the same as that earlier one in this respect, that is, in relation to the same soul. While in another respect, that is simply as matter, the two are not at all the same. And both of these aspects are true without any contradiction. Therefore, the individual man who returns after death is precisely this very same man who is living now. This is not affected by the fact that this earthly body is passing, corruptible, perishing, and composed of opposing qualities of the four elements and of the heavy, coarse humors, while the body in the other world for the people of paradise is luminous, eternal, sublime, essentially alive, and never subject to corruption, death, disease, and decrepitude. And the body of the unbeliever in the other world may have a molar tooth as big as a mountain, or his form may be that of a dog, a pig, or something else that melts away in hellfire, which flames up over the hearts. Then their skins and organs will be exchanged, as he, may he be exalted, said, as often as their skins are well cooked, we shall give them new skins in exchange so that they may taste the punishment. Likewise, it is related that the damned person is forced to climb up a steep path in hell for 70 years. As often he touches his hand to this flaming mountain, it will melt, and when he raises it up, it will come back. And similarly with his foot, whenever he sets it down, it will melt, and when he lifts it up, it will reappear. We can psychologize all of this, which is subtly what Mulla Sadra is basically trying to tell us. Sure, so it should be known that it is this psychic body that is resurrected in the rising, even though it is not this body with respect to its matter. This is according to the first and second fundamental premises, 1a and b. That is, that a thing is what it is by virtue of its form, not its matter, and that its continued existence in its specific individuality does not rule out the changing of its accidental qualities, and even its matter, insofar as the matter is distinguished by those accidents. B. None of the things that a man sees and directly witnesses in the other world, whether they be the blessings of paradise, such as the houris, palaces, gardens, streams, and trees, or the opposite sorts of punishment that are in hell, are outside the essence of the soul and separate from the soul's being. Indeed, in accordance with the fourth fundamental premise, 1d, these forms in the soul are more strongly substantial, more firmly established, and more permanent in their reality than their material forms, which are constantly changing and being regenerated. No one should ask concerning the place and position of these forms, whether they are inside this world or outside of it, or whether they are above the confines of the material universe, between the layers of the heavens, or within the bounds of the heavenly spheres themselves. For you have learned that these things are another modality of being, having no relation to this physical world with respect to place or extension. As for what is reported in the tradition that the earth of paradise is the pedestal and its roof is the throne of the merciful God, this does not refer to the spatial expanse belonging to the directions of this world and located between this world and the outermost sphere of the fixed stars. Rather, its intention is what is according to the level of the inner meaning and hidden aspect of these things, since paradise is within this hidden, unseen aspect of the heavens. Similarly, with the report that paradise is in the seventh heaven and hell is within the deepest earth. This also refers to what is behind the veils of this material world. Therefore, in accordance with the fifth fundamental premise, 1e, the realm of the other world is eternal and everlasting. Its blessings do not pass away, and its fruits are never finished or forbidden. Everything that man desires and longs for is immediately present there. This is section D. Indeed, the mere conception of the thing is the very same as its presence, and the pleasure and blessings in that world only correspond to the desires of the blessed. This is according to the sixth fundamental principle, section 1f. E. The wellspring of all that a man attains and is requited with in the other world, whether it be good or evil, paradise or hell, is solely in his own essence, in such things as his intentions, thoughts, beliefs, and traits of character. Now, this has become fully psychologized, or pneumatologized, rather. The causes of these things are not something separate from a man's being and his location in accordance with the seventh fundamental principle. Section 1G. F. Certain individual men may be so perfect in essence that they become the angels drawn near to God, who pay no heed to anything other than him, not even to the pleasures and different orders of blessings in paradise. This is in accordance with the third fundamental premise, section 1C. So, the third section, principle concerning aspects of the difference between the bodies of this world and of the other world in regard to the mode of corporeal being. These aspects of the difference in mode of being between bodies in this world and the next are many. A. Among them is the fact that every body in the other world possesses the spirit of life and indeed is living by its very essence. One cannot even conceive of a body there not having life. That is quite different from this world, where there are many bodies that do not possess life and consciousness. And even in those that do have life, their life is something that occurs to them accidentally and is added to them. Another difference is that bodies in this world are receptive to their souls by way of their material preparedness, while souls in the other world take their own bodies by way of immediate affirmation. It's a very theurgic thing to say. So in the other world, we are in the presence of, real theurgy. Here, bodies and materials gradually ascend according to their states of preparedness and transformations until they attain to the ranks of souls. But in the other world, the command of creation and life descends from souls into bodies. C. Another aspect is that here potentiality precedes actuality in time, while the actuality is prior to the potentiality in essence. But there, the potentiality is prior to the actuality, both in essence and its being. D. Here, actuality is more exalted than potentiality because it is the end or final cause of the potentiality. But there, potentiality is more exalted than actuality since it is the potentiality that actually makes the actuality because it is the efficient cause. E. Another difference is that the bodies and objects of the other world are infinite according to the number of conceptions and perceptions of the souls. Because the proofs for the finitude of physical dimensions do not apply to that world, but only within the confines and dimensions of material things. Nor, despite the unlimited number of bodies, is there any crowding or interference between things in the other world. And no thing there is in a direction inside or outside of anything else. Indeed, every human being, whether among the blessed or the damned, has his own complete and independent world, more immense than this world and organized without regard to the course of any other individual's psychic world. For example, each of the people of blessedness may have all the land and possessions he wants, of whatever extent he wants. This was something that Abu Yazid Bastami was alluded to in his famous saying that even if the throne and all it contains should enter into one of the corners of Abu Yazid's heart, he would not even notice it. In glossing what Mulla Sadra is talking about here, I would send people back to Ibn Arabi's commentary on this very specific saying of Abu Yazid Bastami in the Fusus, in the Bezels of Wisdom. F. One more difference is that bodies of the other world and all its marvels, including the gardens, rivers, chambers, dwellings, palaces, pure companions, houris, and all the other attendants, servants, slaves, and retinues of the people of paradise, all of these exist through a single being, which is the being of each man among the people of blessedness. This is because each of them encompasses these things as a support from God and lodging from the forgiving, the merciful. In other words, your heavenly paradise, your Jannah, is a self-created one. So in other words, at the level of the soul, when discarnate from body, you are actually generating your own paradise in the same way that God is creating the world. So there's a very subtle argument of theosis about the people of paradise in this particular passage that we're reading from Mulla Sadra. But on the contrary, the state of the tormented person in hell, with regard to the flames, chains, shackles, serpents, and other things which happen to him, is not exactly like this. For they are instead encompassed and surrounded by these punishments, as is saying, we have surely prepared for the sinners of fire. Its tent surrounds them, and surely Gehenna surrounds the unbelievers. Verily, there's a message in this for people who worship their Lord. And that was section 2 and 3 of the part B of mashriq number 2, the wisdom of the throne. And now I open the floor if anybody wants to say anything or has any revelation about this sort of thing. This is, on the one hand, Mulla Sadra is doing he's doing exactly the same thing that we saw with Ibn Arabi, where he's articulating a very standard orthodox position. And then in the next line, but unlike Ibn Arabi, who does it in a very shocking kind of way, Mulla Sadra does it in a very logical, philosophical kind of way, and then unpacking what he believes all this means. And with him, it's very overtly psychologized or made or lockified, as in all of this is occurring within the reality of the soul itself. Right? So it is delocalizing paradise or relocalizing paradise and hell within the soul of the aspirant, of each person themselves. And if this is the case about the nature of the akhirah, the hereafter, then by implication, what Mulla Sadra is saying is that the hereafter, whether in its paradisal or in its infernal state, is actually here now. It's not a time thing. You can step into that or have already stepped into one or other of the dimensions right at this very moment. Just something that many Sufis actually say quite openly.
Yeah, so on that point, what's to be said about the whole Day of Judgment thing? It's sort of regarded as something that happens in some present or some future that we're not aware of.
Depends who you talk to or at what level you're talking to. If you want to take it as a post-mortem thing, I mean, I think we kind of already touched on this and said that because the soul is creating its paradise in its hell at this moment. At the moment of the exodus, your Lord, which is yourself, judges you, okay? And by virtue of what you have noetically created for yourself, whether of a hell or a paradise in this life, you step into that right away. The Zoroastrians obviously have kind of invoked them several times now, had this very beautiful kind of imagery of that, at the death state, at the moment of the exodus, the first thing that the soul meets is its Diana, its holy guardian angel, which is always a female, by the way, in all these Mazdian texts. And the Diana that they meet is either extremely beautiful or extremely ugly, depending on whether they have implemented the good thoughts, the good words, the good deeds, the three Zoroastrian ethical axioms. And if they have failed in that, then they meet a very ugly looking demon, which is themselves, who, and if they have been good, then they meet this beautiful damsel, and one or the other either leads them across the Chinvat bridge, which is the Sirat bridge that we find in the Quran, which is, sharper than the razor's edge. And the soul that has, fulfilled its directive and, done the good, spoken good words and good deeds and good thoughts and all of that, will cross this razor sharp Chinvat bridge lighter than a feather, as guided by their Diana, their holy guardian angel. And the one who meets this ugly looking ogre, as they try to cross the bridge, fall over and into the world of the Angramanyu, the world of the chaos, the Druj, the Zoroastrian hell.
Okay, I see. And can this sort of, teleological end be sort of normalizing in a sense? Because there are always these people who are just like living lives of like selfish hedonism where they're hurting people, but they love their life because, again, they're hedonists. And then on the opposite, you've got these people who are just like healers, but then they're, like a doctor or something who's just miserable. for some reason, maybe of their like own brain chemistry or something. Is this something that'll like normalize at the end for each of them?
Well, I mean, one would think that it would normalize because at the point of the Exodus, you're no longer held back by the biochemical, physical restrictions of the material world. And so, but on the other hand, see, this is the thing. This also goes back to in some kind of a tangential way to the whole question that we've been having back and forth between Hussein and I about the reality of ethics and morality. What this particular philosophical perspective is suggesting is that states of consciousness are self-generated. Okay, so from that perspective, there is a sort of a warning and piece of advice that is being constantly given to to refine the thoughts, to be mindful of the thoughts, right? Because that paradisal and or hellish state is already here. It's not something that you have to wait for at the moment of your death. So be very mindful of the states of mind that you are creating, whether through your mind or through your actions that are also have a mindfulness to them as well. But this, because of its Abrahamic and specifically Shiite Muslim pedigree, there's also the belief that, in this world, the righteous suffer. Why? Because the vast majority of people are idiots and, they can't see the truth and they persecute the saints and the righteous and kill the prophets and all the stuff that we know about. But as long as we are mindful of our own state, and are very consciously trying to disengage our emotions and our subtle body from the freakishness of the world outside, we're fine, even if we are persecuted, even if we're scorned and rejected and all the rest of it. And in some of his own gloss and some of his other works, Mulla Sadra actually does address this very directly, because this is a question. If everything is state of mind and there, then by implication you suggest there's no morality, then why are the prophets and the saints suffering in the world? And he answers this by saying that, well, they suffer because you have all these, ignorant, hellish kind of people surrounding them. But what they do is that within themselves, they are always disengaged from that scorn. They don't allow the blows and the arrows of these idiots of humanity to affect them in any kind of concrete way. So they maintain their poise, their inner paradise, their noetic paradise within themselves, while being attacked right, left, center by the rest of the world. And in this is a piece of advice that this is what the wayfarer really needs to take on board. That no matter how bad the physical, spatial, temporal conditions of their life may become, as long as they are maintaining their own inner poise and equilibrium, they're fine. Even if they're responding to the scorn and whatnot of the outside world, which the prophets do. I mean, we read it all throughout the pages of the Quran. The prophet is condemning and throwing all kinds of invective at these Qurayshites. Now, by a very kind of a surface approach to this kind of logic that Mulla Sadra is presenting to us, one would think, well, the prophet is the prophet himself in hell because his irascible nature is responding to these. I mean, he's saying no, because within himself, the prophet is at that paradise. He is the embodiment of the paradise itself, and it's because of what the Jannah represents, what this equilibrium of this Jannah represents. The prophet can actually say what he does in the Quran to his enemies, because what they are is the complete opposite of all of that. And their being is actually sowing hell for everybody else around them and dragging everybody else around them into that hell, right? So in other words, that hellish dynamic is just as contagious as its opposite, the paradisal one. So the paradisal noetic state draws others into itself, just as the hellish one has the potential of drawing others to it. And we see this in normal, everyday engagement, where because we're social beings, because we're emotive, intuitive, feeling beings, the states of consciousness of other people directly affect us. We're not islands. But the goal of a spiritual path is to make you, in a sense, an island. This is what the Naqshbandis refer to when they talk about khalvat dar anjuman, having a retreat within society. You're in the society, but you're retreating from it at the same time, right? So that's what this is mean. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not just saying that everything is state of mind, no morality exists, so be mindful and do whatever you want and love your life. And no, it's not. It's not saying, because that is falling into hedonism, and that kind of moral hedonism is compounding the problems of the veiling, the overall veiling.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Anybody else want to say something? Jeff?
I had a funny thought as you were reading that. I wonder if it's possible to be among the blessed and the damned simultaneously, because that's
What?
how I feel sometimes.
Well, I don't think you could be one or the other simultaneously, but like that great character in Star Wars Rebels, the Bindu, you can be the one in the middle, neither the light sider Jedi or the dark sider Sith. The one, that's one of my favorite all-time characters in that whole Star Wars universe. Yeah, that you can be. And this is what he's calling for, to be the one in the middle. The saints that even transcend the paradisal state that he's talking about are precisely those, who are neither of the hell or the paradise. They're beyond it. They're the one in the middle. And they can simultaneously use either or. They can be either a Sith or a Jedi at will.
Yeah, that seems more like closer to the truth, at least from my perspective. This either or thing, paradise
Yeah.
or hell, is a little bit too simple. I mean, it just seems like there's both of those realities going on at the same time on any given day of the week, really. And yeah, so I chuckle when I read about the blessed and then the damned. It's like, okay, well, I can relate to both of those states. And it's funny that Star Wars series you're watching, I notice it's called Andor, and every time I see the
Andor's
title,
great.
I'm seeing or and or. So like it's either or perhaps and at the same time, both at the same time. So
That
that
is
was
such a
interesting that you
great
just
show.
brought up a
Yeah.
Star Wars analogy there with the Sith and the Jedi.
Yeah.
And what was it, the Bindu in the middle?
Yeah, this is from Star Wars Rebels. This was the animated series that ran during the last decade, and it's also about the rebellion. But there's a specific cast of characters, and they end up in one of the seasons they end up on a planet, uninhabited planet, and there's a very ancient being that is neither a Sith or a Jedi, and he first makes contact through the mind with one of the leading characters after the leading character is blinded, and basically brings him back to a sort of vision through the Force after being blinded. And this character was known as the Bindu, and it's just what Dave Filoni came up with in that character was just genius, because this thing is neither this side or that side; it's one in the middle. It's almost like a god, is beyond the limitations of either the Sith or the Jedi, the dark side or the light side.
That's great. I haven't seen any of Andor or the one you were just talking about. I might have to go back and watch those.
They're fantastic. I mean,
Yeah,
um, Star Wars Disney has produced quite a bit of trash since
yeah,
it acquired Disney at Lucasfilm, but the two shows that really were excellent. One was the animated Rebel series, and the other has been this Andor they just finished this week. It's just absolutely phenomenal television, because it explores all these areas of moral ambiguity, between good and bad, where these these sides sometimes blur, in a given
Mhm.
struggle. And my all-time favorite character from the Andor series was this character, Luthen Rael. And he has a monologue in the first, and I think in the fourth or fifth um, episode of the first series, where it's just, I think, Shakespearean monologue. It was so well done. These writers were excellent, and also on the screen was executed. So it explores this sort of thing, you know. Um, and I encourage people to kind of explore these kind of ideas through film and theater and television and that sort of thing. And so
Yeah.
the Ender was great. I encourage everybody to go and watch it because there's a lot of different layers that these writers put into that series that you don't get in the standard Disney Star Wars stuff.
No. Okay, great. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I just assumed since Disney's acquisition of the franchise that it's all downhill from there. So I was really surprised actually to hear you speak glowingly about some of the content
And I'm a
that,
merciless critic of bad productions, as you know
yeah,
very well. But this was excellent. You know,
nice.
this was like a space version of I would say the first seven series of the Game of Thrones before the eighth went kind of downhill. This was at kind of that level of goodness. Really well done. Yeah,
Awesome. Awesome.
yeah,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
I guess while we're talking about Star Wars, there's this whole thing with Anakin, how when he's Darth Vader, he's not a good dude. But then he sort of has this redemption moment, and he becomes sort of like, you sort of see him at the end as like a good Force ghost. That's kind of what this reminds me of.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? When they're on
Yeah,
the,
of
on the
course they do.
Ewok
Yeah, yeah,
planet and they're chilling at they're chilling
yeah.
at the fire.
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah.
It's funny what you can get from movies. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say right quick.
No, I'm sorry, yeah.
Star Trek was another good franchise, and really just about any science fiction movie, and even horror movies for that matter. I've been watching a lot of horror for some reason lately, and it's funny what you can get out of them. Like
You ever
just
watched the
depending
ninth?
on.
Did you ever see the Ninth Gate? Johnny Depp. This is a movie back in the 90s. Yeah,
Actually,
90s,
no.
zeros. This film is an initiatic film. You should watch it.
Okay, all
It's
right.
it's probably one of the
I like
best.
Johnny Depp.
Yeah, Johnny Depp is in it. It's fantastic, this film.
Cool, thank you. You gave me an idea for something to do later because I'm running out of movies to watch. So I've got Star Wars on the list and now Ninth Gate. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Nate.
Hey, Wahid, I just wanted to ask, I've been trying to get a sense if Mullah Sadra is taking any or is hinting at any kind of view that somebody who has created their state in Jahannam may eventually leave that state, some kind of universal restoration. Do you think any of that is there or that's coming?
Yeah, that's kind of implied in Mulla Sadra. He does quote those passages from Ibn Arabi in his Asfar. So yeah, this is kind of implied. He doesn't kind of get into it this much in here, but in the Asfar he does. So he does subscribe to that kind of point of view. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Hussein, Hassan.
I I've had this question about the body and the relationship between the body and the soul. Um, the basic question is like, is there in Mulla Sadra, is there a mind body problem in the sense of like the Cartesian mind body problem?
Well,
And the
not
reason there's
not in the Cartesian way. I do think there's a mind-body problem with Mulla Sadra for the reasons I stated last week, because I think his notion of matter, where he's not being very clear, but distinguishing between universal matter and then form. and then kind of saying, there's form and then there's matter, and matter, evolves, etc. Because of my own reverse hylomorphism, I do think there is a subtle mind-body problem in Mulla Sadra, yes. But not in the Cartesian way. I mean, it's obvious why not. Because with Mulla Sadra, this in what he's telling us here, it is the mind or the form, as he kind of insists on that term, that is constant. But the matter of the form, right, in its bodily material form, is the one that is constantly transitioning and evolving. So that is there. So it's not a Cartesian problem. The problem, from my point of view, is that, in my opinion, the hylic matter of the form itself is the propelling agent of the form. Okay? And Mulla Sadra does talk about the Hayula, the universal matter, but he doesn't quite, get to the place that Sheikh Ahmad got with the reverse hylomorphism and the layers of matter and the tashkik even in matter, and the correspondence of matter to existence. He doesn't get there. So that is where I think a very subtle mind-body problem unintentionally starts to occur in Mulla Sadra himself. Yeah. Because the question then arises then, if the form is the immutable, then what is the substrate of all these forms of worlds that it's producing out of itself in the after state, right? What are these? Where, if it is within the soul itself, then the soul itself must have, something as a primary reality, which has to be universal matter, to be able to produce all of this stuff that it's experiencing in its own independent reality on the other side, where its potentiality precedes its actuality. I mean, by him saying that alone, in my opinion, he is, without realizing this himself, he is actually acceding to a very fundamental premise of the reverse hylomorphism of Shaikhism. Because matter, universal matter is infinite potentiality. It is the potentiality of all potentialities, out of which every actuality emerges through its descent into spatio-temporality. So Mulla Sadra is actually exceeding that, but his language is a bit off, in my opinion, on that.
So the way that I read that part, the hylomorphism is, it seems like he has a kind of relative idea of matter and form itself, where the matter is like that which is most immediately getting absorbed into the form. So in the physical world, the soul is the form of the body, and the body is, ultimately, it seems like he wants to say that the body doesn't really exist because it just gets absorbed into the soul.
Yeah.
But then when you go up a level of being, then the soul becomes the matter for the forms that inhere in the soul, or maybe the intellect becomes the form of the soul, and the soul becomes a kind of matter. So that matter for him seems to be a kind of relative, matter and form seem to be a relative concept.
Yeah.
But I guess ultimately everything gets resolved into some kind of form for him.
Yeah.
But just going back to the reason I say that the mind-body problem, and maybe you answered this, but I just want to clarify, is the discussion that he has about vision. And when I'm talking about the body in the sense of the physical body, where he's going through and he's saying, the reason that vision can't be all of these explanations that people give for what it is because the material forms are positional and the soul is not positional. That seems to be his one of his basic premises, and so you can extend that to knowledge. That's in the context of knowledge, but you can extend it to being. And there's also this kind of confusing thing where it seems that the soul becomes corporeal. It's just money, this
Yeah.
idea that it's corporeal, and then it has a kind of sensible birth. And there's this kind of like, it seems like a duality of forms of the soul, and this is the way that Christian Jambé even puts it. He said that there's two forms of the soul, and so there seems like that duality within the soul itself, or this kind of disconnection between the soul and the physical matter, because one is positional and one isn't. So to me, it all seems to, I can't seem to explain how these two things can interact or fit together.
Well, for me, this is only resolved when we subscribe to the Shaykhi subtle physiology, where the dualism becomes a quaternity, and that quaternity kind of resolves the mind-body split, the subtle, unintended kind of split that we are finding somewhat in Mulla Sadra himself, because then the quaternity becomes active. But I think, from a certain point of view, this whole discussion about the reverse relationship between potentiality and actuality in the noetic reality of the soul slightly resolves this problem that you're putting your finger on, right? Because what he's saying is that the soul has that capability of the potentiality that it thinks, wills, whatever, has that, has a capability of producing any form in front that it so wills, which then means that there is no separation between the contents and itself. It is its own substrate, as it were. And if that is the case, then this holds for all the levels of the soul's experience, not just the noetic. This would also include the sensible, the only difference being between the noumenal and the phenomenal, there's just a reverse in the causality of how things happen. Where the potentiality is dormant, it's in the bottom, and the actuality is the one that becomes the manifest and is the final cause of an efficient cause, whereas on the other side, it's the other way around. So it's mere willing or thinking of something is its actualization in that potential state. Whereas here, that's not the case.
Okay, that's interesting. I've never been able to wrap my head around Sheikh Ahmed's. I mean, I understand his quaternity of bodies, and it's really beautiful and amazing how he does it. But still, when it comes to the physical body, I'm still confused about what he's trying to say, because he says that at death the element, he calls it the elemental body. The elements just go back. And so I always think, well, if matter is the thing that's constant and the form is what's changing, he still seems to want to say that the matter of the physical body is actually disintegrated and has nothing to do with the resurrection body. So I've always been confused about what is it exactly that survives the death of the body if the body itself is physically disintegrated. Like that's just always been
What survives is the subtle body, which is the soul that Mulla Sadra is talking about, the nafs that Mulla Sadra is talking about, except with Sheikh Ahmed Ahsai, in the way that he's kind of unpacking all of what Mulla Sadra is putting in front of us, is a lot more involved. It's very much like Proclus's, the double ochema that we have in Proclus, where there's a lower ochema and then there's a higher ochema, and it's the union between the two that then makes that ochema ascend to the hennas in the afterlife, or even in any kind of ascension experience. This is essentially what Sheikh Ahmad is kind of doing in a kind of Shiite Islamic context, the same thing that Proclus does. Whereas with Mulla Sadra, he's not really making these partitions about what is what, and I think that is the only difference between Mulla Sadra and Sheikh. But Sheikh Ahmad is saying that the elemental body of the four elements of air, fire, water, and earth, they completely disintegrate at the moment of death. Yet, he, like Mulla Sadra, is also holding that during the course of the development of a particular physical life, this elemental body is sort of the container, the footstool, the core seat of that soul's experience. Soul being the throne, if you would, the ash, and these physical elements that compose this physicality being the proverbial footstool. And then at the moment of death, as it ascends, all these elements go back into their own elemental reality, physical elemental reality. And then if that body is developed and unites with its higher Ohama, with its higher soul, spirit, then it makes that ascension. What Mulla Sadra is saying, which is not being very as clear, in my opinion, as Sheikh Ahmad is being, is that he's taking one reality, calling it nafs, and holding that this thing can modulate between the paradisal and the hellish state. With Sheikh Ahmad and the Shah Ziyara, we get an actual very detailed explanation as to why one or the other actually even happens. And he uses this, he uses very extensive imagery of alchemy. So he takes these Shiite hadith and then explains this whole, trajectory of rejection or affirmation of the Imams, and in fact, an extremely alchemical explanation of what this actually even means. Like the great work, where you either, if you fail, in certain stages of creating the stone, this happens. Your entire work just goes, pear-shaped. Whereas with, if you succeed, if you do this, and then this, then alchemical operation succeeds, and you have created the opus. You have succeeded the opus. That's the way he explains.
Yeah, it's what I remember of that is so fascinating. Okay, that clarifies things a lot. I was just thinking, about like the differences ultimately between Sadra and Ahsa'i, and I was having trouble figuring. I mean, I haven't gone too deeply into Sheikh Ahmed, but I had this kind of image that in both their cases there is something that's physical. Like ultimately we can distinguish between physical and material. And that seems to be something that they both have in common. It's like there's something that's physical that has to be let go of.
Both of them also accept the premise that there are levels of physicality. There's the sensible physical, and then there's the numinous physical. Okay? Both of them accede and accept this fundamental axiom, which is the most controversial thing about the both of them, and why exoteric theologians can't stand either Mulla Sadra or Sheikh Ahmad, because with them, the resurrection is a physical event at the end of time. Whereas with both Mulla Sadra and Sheikh Ahmad, well, their retort is, well, what do you mean by physical? You mean the elementals? And if that is the case, then one can make the argument that the body that you have today is composed of the elements that may have belonged to somebody else's body at some other time through this whole process of chemical or biological evolution over time. So what are you talking about a physical resurrection at the end of time? What's resolving? The only thing that makes sense, therefore, from their point of view, is that we're talking about different levels of sensibility or corporeality. There's the corporeality of the sensible world, and then there's the corporeality of the numinous world. So they have this in common. The difference is that actually on this point, there is really no basic difference between Sadra and Ahsa'i at all, despite the claims of Sheikh Ahmad to the contrary. There's actually the similarity is almost identical. What Sheikh Ahmad does is that he augments the argument beyond Mulla Sadra, and then brings this whole extremely alchemical dimension to the whole discussion.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Hassan?
Sidi, my first question, when Mullah Sadra counts the differences between the physical body, the body, let's say, in this world and the body in the other world, one of the differences is that the body of the other world is essentially alive. What he means by that expression, that it is alive by its essence.
Well, the essence is the quiddity or the reality of a particularity. Okay? Here in this physical world, everything that composes our physical self is coming into being and passing away through the process of, chemical and biological alteration at every moment. I mean, the science says that our cells are transforming, at every moment, from one moment to the next. So, this is what he's saying. The physical body in this world is constantly undergoing change, where the essence remains the same. The essence of Hassanhood is always Hassan, not somebody else. Whereas in the other world, it is completely the opposite. Okay, so your essence remains its essential self on the other side, in the world of the soul, and it is, the body or the corporeality of that form is a secondary reality to it. And you're very much aware of that fact on the other side. Such that you can even, he's suggesting, you can take on anybody that you like. Which is a weird argument because I've had this debate with a couple of people who've read Mulla Sadra who believe in reincarnation and say, well, isn't Mulla Sadra here saying that reincarnation is possible by the will of the soul from the other side? If he's saying that, the potentiality precedes the actuality, and the potentiality can produce anything that it wants at any time by the mere willing of it, then doesn't that mean that if it's, say, a certain soul on the other side wants to come back to this world, it can do that at this very moment? Yes and no. Number one, why would you want to come back to this realm of limitation? But number two, by virtue of the individuality of each soul, there's only one kind of a trajectory to the experience of that soul, and that is up. Right? It's not a graph. They're up and down. You come into this life, you get one aha moment, you go to the other side, then you decide to come back, and then you fall down, and then you go back up again. It's not like that at all. There's just it's a trajectory going up. And as we read in Ibn Arabi, this trajectory of going up also includes going to hell. Right? Because as far as Ibn Arabi is concerned, that even the hellish realm, even the infernal realms are realms of mercy, so that even the denizens of hell are learning in that process. And in the end, they will be redeemed, etc., as we read in the Fusus al-Hikam.
The other one, can you explain a little bit more exactly about the point where he says that again, in this world, potentiality precedes actuality, but in the other world, it is the opposite. The actuality precedes
No, otherwise. In this world, the actuality is the
superior.
Is the superior because it is the outcome of the potential, whereas on the other side, it is the other way around.
Yes, for
something is both its being and its of the essence of that thing.
I understand why we consider that actuality is superior to potentiality, which is the standard philosophical understanding for this world, but cannot grasp its reversal.
Yeah. But its reversal is already presupposed by what we read in the Fusus about the Ayana Thabita. right? Why? Because the ayana thabita are actually those initial thoughts in the mind of God, right? And they are absolute potentialities, but their potentiality is such that they are the matrices of everything that come into being in their wujuda ainiya, in their essential existence in the world of matter. So what Mulla Sadra is doing is taking the next step and then asserting that the reality of the soul is as if it is God, in that, this cogitation of the ayana thabita, right? But on an individual level of the world of malakut rather than the world of the hahut or the lahut, right? So this is basically what Mulla Sadra is kind of saying.
Yes, this is exactly the example which came in my mind when I thought about the. So it is like the same way the faith proceeds from Allah Ta'ala, the
Yes,
universal faith. It's something similar happens to the level of the soul, which the faith proceeds from the soul,
yes.
and it creates its own world.
There you have it. Yeah. In the same manner that the generation that we read in the first chapter of the Bezels of Wisdom, God wanted to have a mirror, and that mirror is a mirror of itself, which is Adam, right? In that world, Mulla Sadra is kind of suggesting, in that world, the reality of the soul and its creative ability of its paradisal or hellish state is identical to that very thing. Such that these contents of what it is creating, it is within itself. So that potentiality, that cogitation of the potential is its actuality.
Okay, the next one, again, I found this chapters for today extremely beautiful and deep. He very well solves the problem that in the paradise everyone will have what he wants, but this would arise to some potential problems. Okay, if I want something and you want the opposite, then how the problems
Well, he
will be resolved?
he
But
answers why. He answers the reason, because because this is your own world. You see, so it's not like one that you're interfering, and it's all happening within you. That whole reality. It's as if you yourself are that mirror, right? That thinking mirror is, as it were, is the way that I've kind of framed this in my own kind of margins on this book. It's your soul becomes that thinking mirror. And so whatever it thinks within that mirror, it produces within that mirror.
yes, exactly. So this problem, it is just artificial. It is not real problem.
No.
But on other side, if we take his explanation very literally, uh, uh, that okay, let's say, but this does not exclude the opportunity, let's say, for some universal paradise where we are together. What I mean the following: by the virtue of the unity of, let's say, the aqil wal ma'kul, that if, let's say, two souls they direct their attention to one another, that they can have some common reality or common
Okay.
experience and so on.
Yeah. I see what you said. Okay. Whereas he doesn't solve the problem in this particular way. In the Ismaili doctrine, right? At least from what I'm aware, from whether the Tayyibis or some of the early Ismaili theosophers like Sajistani and even, a commentator like Nasser Khosrow, who, is basically a Persianized version of Sajistani. They say that, the whole aim of life, once you die, right, the felicitous, those who have, gleaned the ta'aleem of the Imam, right, merge into the universal soul. Without any argument that I have come across stating that there is any there is distinction within that universal soul, and that the individuated souls that exist in this life get to know each other. They seem to suggest that that is all that's the dualism of this world. And once you die, when you merge into the universal soul, you are one soul. And so any distinction that occurred in the spatial temporal life is gone. So that is the felicity. This is my understanding of kind of the pristine Ismaili doctrine on the postmortem state. They take it that way. Mulla Sadra, in a kind of roundabout sort of way, sort of suggesting the same thing, but without getting into a discussion of the individual or collective. Right? His argument is framed around the experience of the individual, but the way that he is discussing it and arguing it would impute a collectivity to this experience, in the sense that that soul is one thing, in the same way that the Ismaili theosophers suggested the universality of the universal soul. And that is why there's no distinction. So, your meeting with others is in essence on that other side a meeting with yourself. There's no longer a distinction between, for example, you and your deceased family and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And this, in a sense, is, you can justify this as the Ismailis did with the first verse of Surah An-Nisa about the nafs, the nafs and wahidat, the single soul. God created humanity from a single soul, nafs and wahidat, and then separated it into male and female, and after that into tribes and nations, etc., in order to know each other. So that's a Quranic argument.
Okay, just one or two more comments. So the other thing which I very much liked in his explanation, that indeed we are creating our paradise or hellfire here and now by our thoughts, by our actions, and so on. And this is a very, at least for me, very helpful as a guiding line how to spend your life, because very often I hear the expression that the one who built his paradise here in this dunya, he fears the death because all of his efforts, they are for this materialistic life, and then he doesn't want to take the step to go for the akhirah. But it is very simplistic and explanation, which at least for me has the opposite effect, because what they have in their mind by building paradise in this world, it is not paradise. It is paradise just at surface level. But when you look at the life for these people who are supposedly building their paradise here in this world, what is deep in their souls, it is exactly the opposite. It is very disturbed state of mind. And But if you explain to the people that just have a good life, try to think good, to do good, and what you are building and striving for here in this world, you will take not only you will experience its pleasure and its fruits here and now, but it would be multiplied after the death. It will have a very more positive effect.
What is the question?
This was like a comment that uh, I don't like the rigid Sufism, which only consists of the misunderstood asceticism, that we just deny every pleasure of this world and just we should stay away.
Well,
And
as you remember, even this is one of the things that Ibn Arabi very categorically rejects. I mean, the asceticism has its place in terms of training you, okay, but it has a shelf life, and once that shelf life has come, then you throw it away, because as far as he is concerned, every pleasure and pain itself has a divine root. So the normal ascetic point of view, whether we're talking about the ascetic Sufis or even the exotericists, in his opinion, is a form of shirk. It's a misunderstanding of the nature of God, very definite misunderstanding. But he also believes that everything has its proper place. I mean, Ibn Arabi in his biography admits that from the moment that he had his kind of awakening experience when he was about 13, 14 years old to sometime roughly in his mid-20s, he was absolutely disgusted by any kind of sexuality, and he fled from it. He mentioned something to the effect of almost a decade, that this was his state. This was his training state. So during that period, from his early teens until his mid-20s, he would shun the society of women, not from any kind of a moralizing thing, as far as he's telling us, but because his whole being was repelled by it. And this was the period that he was training and doing the zikrs and spending time in the cemeteries, etc. But once that time ended, he found a wife, started siring children, and then we read towards the most of his life he had this extremely open, beneficent, and utterly tantric view of the opposite sex that scandalized many people. Like, for example, the experience that he has in Mecca of that young Iranian pilgrim, Nizamuddin, or Nizam, Ainul Shams, the Iranian girl, where he got this epiphany of God through her at the Kaaba, right? So all of these things were happening as well. But for a certain period of time in those early years in Andalusia, he was completely repelled by female company. So this tells you that the asceticism itself is a very temporary thing for certain people in the path. It has its place if it occurs, and it doesn't have its place if it's not a lifelong thing. It's not something that we cling on to forever, because all of these various states, pleasure, pain, repulsion, attraction, all of these things have a divine root. Everything.
thank you very much, Sidi.
Sure thing. All right. If nobody has anything else to say, we can leave it here for this week. Like I said, next week we're going to have a pretty long reading, because I want to start to finish this section because the following mashriq, the third mashriq, begins to resolve everything that we've read in the last two sections. And it's one of the more interesting and deeper, it's the conclusion of the book. So, he really brings everything together in that third mashriq. So we'll read this long section for next week that 4 and 5 finish the second, and then the week after that we'll go, we'll start on the third mashriq. So until next week, everybody have a good week, and everybody be well. Ya Allah, until next time.